Hey guys, Muse Ninja Matt here. I have been to see Guardians of the Galaxy. We went to the midnight showing so that we could see it first out of everybody, and that came out a lot earlier here than it did in the US. Gonna be talking about the points that I wanted to talk about. There will be spoilers. So from this point on, we're gonna spoil the whole damn movie. So just know that. So this movie was interesting. Thing is, the first Guardians of the Galaxy is not only one of the best Marvel movies, but just one of the best movies I've ever seen. It was a team that a lot of casual comic fans didn't know about. If the film had flopped, no one would have really cared. However, if it had succeeded, brilliant. And Guardians of the Galaxy shocked everybody with how damn good that movie was. And I adore the original, can watch it time and time again. And so a lot of people were like, well, the second one's going to be just as good, if not better. And especially with the quality of Marvel films and where we're at with the Marvel films and leading into Infinity War, there was so much riding on this film. For me personally, I wasn't excited because it was Guardians of the Galaxy 2. I was excited because I was going, we're so close to Infinity War. How's this going to tie in? What's going to happen? Where's the team going to be at the end of the movie? And I can say my instant reaction coming out the cinema sadly was disappointment. And I went with Pete and his girlfriend Zoe, and the three of us all just went, by no means was that a bad movie, but we're still disappointed because when you compare it to the first film, you compare it to the Marvel films, it does kind of drop the ball a bit. There were a couple of issues with it, but it did have some great moments as well. There's not a lot of Infinity War ties, and you're a bit like, oh, okay, whatever. The two biggest things for me from this entire movie were finally Adam Warlock being a thing, not actually showing up, but it was the fact that we saw his casket and we saw the fact that he was being made and he's gonna be powerful enough to take down the Guardians, but apparently he's not gonna be in Infinity War, he's gonna be the villain for Guardians 3, which part of me is gutted about because I just want to see Adam Warlock. But another part of me is like, good, because if he turned up in Infinity War, he'd be such a throwaway character. If he was like, I'm here to destroy the Guardians, and the Guardians went, fuck off. We've got Thanos over there to deal with. Fuck off. So yeah, I'm happy about that. Also, out of nowhere, you have the Stan Lee cameo, and Stan Lee is sat talking to the Watchers. That was the only moment in the film where me and Pete both kind of gasped because we were like, what the fuck, you put the Watchers in this movie? And they're the last post-credit scene as well. But it's weird because the fan theory was that Stan Lee was a Watcher. He was Uatu. That's why he appears in all the films. And when you see him talking to the Watchers, it's funny because he's basically telling them stories, being like, and once I was a FedEx guy and blah, blah, blah. And then at the end credit scene, they're all walking off because actually they're just bored of hearing Stan Lee talk. But when he's going, oh, I'm stuck here, can't one of you help me out? You're like, well, he can't be a Watcher then. There must be some funny connection there. But the fact that Watchers there are great. I hope this wasn't just a throwaway kind of, oh, look, the Watchers, how funny. Like, I want a Watcher to appear during Infinity War and just stand there and start looking and everyone start freaking out. I want that. With this film, we thought pacing was an issue. This film doesn't feel like a film. It feels like this should have been a short movie in between films called, like, Peter's Dad. It's one of those films where it drags where it shouldn't, and then when it kind of ends, it ends and you're like, oh, okay. It kind of feels all over the place. Another thing is the tone of this movie. It goes from full-on kid humour, like really babyish kind of cringy humour, to being incredibly adult and dark. There's quite a lot of swearing in this film, and there's one scene in particular which is where the Ravagers have revolted against Yondu, and all the Ravagers that were supportive of Yondu are being thrown into space, and you see this guy thrown into space. Obviously he dies, and as it zooms out, it's a field of bodies of Ravagers that have died, and I was like, this is not for children, this will freak them the fuck out. So it's a weird mix of, oh, but we're Disney and the kids, and them going, well, we're getting close to Infinity War, and these movies are going to get pretty fucking extreme. We get a lot of, obviously, I say new characters, but like Yondu becomes a more major character. We get introduced to Mantis and Ego, and Nebula's in there, and we get a lot of great character moments. Like Yondu and Rocket connect so well, because Yondu says, you're an asshole to everybody, when actually, you know, you kind of care the most. And he's like, you get turned into a monster, and basically Yondu's like, you're me. And they have really good character moments. And one thing I didn't see coming was Yondu's death. I thought he was going to be with the team. His death was... It was quite hard hitting, and you know, he went out saving Peter, and this ties into the theme that you kind of see coming a mile off of Yondu was always Peter's dad. He was the one that raised him and cared about him, and obviously Yondu's funeral with all the Ravagers turning up is just fantastic. There's a lot of hard hitting moments. There's just moments in this movie where it's not like hard-hitting emotion, it just hits you right in your little nerdy feels, you know? And you can't help but just tear up because of it. We also get Nebula folds well into the team. I didn't know how they were going to do it, but she basically says her and Gamora would always fight. Nebula would always lose, and every time she lost, Thanos would pull her apart and replace parts of her with robotics, trying to make her stronger. And she basically said, because Gamora always had to win, she suffered so much. And Nebula's like, all I wanted was a sister. You know, Nebula's still a bit of a dick and still of this kind of loner character. But you see that basically what she is just angry at Gamora for their childhood, for the suffering she went through. So, you know, them kind of patching things up works well. And Nebula had some cool moments. Mantis is introduced. Her character's kind of weird because she's basically thick as shit in this, and she's more just there to be comic relief in a way. But she is best when she's with Drax, because Drax is funny because he basically says that she's hideous, that she's ugly. He's just a massive dick to her. But there's this one moment where he's thinking about his daughter, and as Mantis uses her powers, Drax is just sat there staring off. She touches him and she just bursts into tears, and like you can see what Drax really feels and what he hides. Baby Groot, I wish there was more of him in this film. I thought this film was just going to be the Baby Groot movie. He has some funny moments. One of the best moments is just he is a baby in it, and they're passing him around and Drax holds him and he falls asleep on Drax's shoulder. I thought that was really cool. But there's a scene where like Yondu wants his new fin because his old one gets shot off, and they ask Groot to get it for him, and you know Groot's not going to come back straight away with the fin. But it feels like a good 10-15 minutes worth of the movie of Groot just coming back with random stuff. And this is where the humour in the film, there's too much of it. They try, and every other line has to be a joke. And some of it is really kind of kiddie-ish humour. And they drag on gags for too long. And I get it, the first Guardians of the Galaxy was the perfect amount of humour. It's basically, they've gone, what did they like from the first one? Let's put even more of it in the second one. And you're like, oh, don't do that. With Ego, he's Peter Quill's dad. And this was really because obviously Peter Quill's dad is Jason of Spartax. No one gives a fuck about that, realistically, unless you wanted to go down the route of Jason dying and like Peter's would have been the ruler of Spartax. That would have been interesting. They did it in the comics. I thought his dad was either going to be Adam Warlock or they were going to go mental with it and do Thanos. And then when they were like, oh, it's Ego the Living Planet, everyone was like, what? You know, they brought in Russell to play him, and the origin of him is actually done really well and is very interesting. He's a celestial, and he's basically like a brain, and he has matter manipulation, so the planet was built around the brain as almost like a shell. And we get one moment where we see a flash on the planet of the face, which is cool. So the planet kind of is Ego. And the human form of him is just an extension of him because he just puts matter together and is like, I'm going to go on walks now. I didn't see him being the villain because there's three villains. You've got Aisha of the Sovereign People, you've got Taserface, who, you know, becomes like the new leader of the Ravagers and rises them up, and then we've got Ego, who's our main big bad. And it's the classic, oh, Peter's found his dad and everything's happy, but things aren't as they seem. And then it turns out that Ego's storyline is that he travelled round planting these weird, like, it basically extensions of him all around the universe, and he sees his goal as that everything should be him. He wants to activate this and basically spread himself across everywhere, but he needs the power of more than just himself to do it. So he travelled around trying to basically have kids that would share his celestial gene. None of them did. They ended up dead, and it is just Peter that has the celestial gene. It's weird because it's like, oh, so basically Peter's a god. You find out as long as Ego, the planet, is alive, Peter will actually be immortal. None of this matters by the end of the movie because, you know, Ego, when they defeat him, we're led to assume Star-Lord doesn't have any powers now, but I reckon some might appear. But yeah, Ego's kind of taken over everywhere, and you find out that Ego... He says that he loved Peter's mother, and he knew if he returned again to Earth, he'd stay. And then his whole plan of spreading himself out wouldn't work. And he says, it was tough putting that tumour in your mother's brain. And straight away, you're like, whoa, that's something I wasn't expecting. But it really justifies why Peter's like, do you know what? You may be my dad, but you're fucking dead now because you killed my mum. It's a good way to justify why would Peter be comfortable defeating Ego. And then, yeah, Mantis is basically introduced because Ego found her, and because she can manipulate emotions to a degree, she basically helps him sleep and is like his little pet. There's a couple of fun little nods, like Sylvester Stallone plays Starhawk, and one of the post-credit scenes is the original first Guardians of the Galaxy team that Yondu was on in the comics. And Starhawk's like, oh, I think he'd be happy that we're a team again. That was just a really fun little thing there, because Michael Rosenbaum is on the team as well, because him and Sylvester Stallone, we found out they were going to be in the film, but we didn't know who they were going to be. Also, they did a teenage Groot, which is something I joked about. I was like, wouldn't it be funny if between Baby Groot and Groot being an adult again, which I assume he will be in Infinity War, they did a teen Groot, and they do where Star-Lord walks in and is like, you need to clean your room, and Groot's just sat playing video games and he's full of attitude and all this kind of stuff. Star-Lord and Ego have a massive fight, and they're both manipulating matter as they fight. Ego just gathers rocks and stuff and makes a giant version of himself. And you see Star-Lord doing something similar, and then Star-Lord turns himself into Pac-Man as he's coming along. It's moments like that that remind you this is Guardians of the Galaxy, and this is what they do, and it just really captures the mood well of it. The team overall in the movie, they do a bit more character building. They still do the will they won't they thing with Gamora and Star-Lord, which leads to not a lot. They kind of force it down your throat, the whole we're a family thing, which is cute at times, but other times they do it too much. We hear a bit more about Drax's family. One thing I found really weird, Rocket is an asshole throughout most of the movie. There's not really a lot of payoff for it. When the Ravagers turn up for Yondu's funeral, we see a scene where Yondu and Starhawk are talking, and you basically find out Yondu was kind of exiled from that table, that council. And then when they turn up, Rocket's like, wow, even though he was a dick to them, they still came to his funeral. And then Star-Lord's like, well, of course. And you're just like, this doesn't justify Rocket being so fucking unlikable throughout this movie. But that's another scene where I was like, whoa, is that you basically see the Ravagers in a fucking brothel, and there's strippers, and it's stuff the Ravagers would do. But again, I'm like, this feels more like your Netflix shows than it does your Disney movies. But we found out that Yondu gets exiled because Ego kept hiring him to go pick up his kids and bring them to him. The Ravagers' code is they don't deal with children whatsoever. Yondu and Star-Lord both kind of half joke and say the only reason that Yondu kept Star-Lord was because he was small, and that's good for thieving because he can fit in places others couldn't. And Yondu kind of says, we both know that's not why I kept you around. The soundtrack's pretty good. Nowhere near as good as Volume 1. So the only other thing I have on my list in front of me, the opening sequence is fantastic. We see the team and they've been hired to protect these like batteries for the sovereign people, and it's the big fucking pink creature with all the teeth comes down. And what's great is they want to play music while they work, and Rocket's like it's just something they've picked up from Star-Lord, that they enjoy the music side of things. And when Groot is baby Groot, they kind of say just stay out the way because you're going to get hurt because he's a baby. And Groot plugs in the speakers, the song comes on, and it's reminiscent of the first film with Star-Lord dancing, because as the credits roll, we just watch Groot dancing around as in the background the rest of his team's getting their asses handed to them. And I just thought that was really, really funny. And then, yeah, the plot kind of all mixes in, basically by having Rocket steal some of the batteries from the Sovereign people. They are hunting down the Guardians. You've got the Ravagers basically say Yondu's gone soft, especially when it comes to the Guardians. So you have like Taserface rises up and whatnot. And then, of course, we've got Ego, who just wants to fucking destroy everything. So it does all tie together and fold together. But yeah, overall, some fantastic moments. I just think the film, almost like I said about Deadpool, suffers from its own hype. In that, yes, it's a good movie, but my expectations were up there. So because it wasn't the best movie, because it was just a pretty good movie, I felt disappointed, which is a shame. Because I'm sure if I went in again with a different mindset, I'd really, really enjoy it. Anyway, guys, that's the points I wanted to talk about when it came to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Still disappointed as well with the post-credit scenes. They were all basically little additions to the movie rather than setting up the next films. But guys, please like, comment and subscribe as it really helps the channel out. Go down below to check out all those links and other bits and pieces of news. And I will see you all in the next one. See you later.